Well, I think loneliness overall is a topic that people are uncomfortable speaking about. And I mean, the topic of my book is called executive loneliness. And in people's mind, that is a negative term, and people perhaps try to avoid it when you invite people for a talk and so on. People are quite skeptical. That just means that they're uncomfortable hitting it heads on, and
Mm,
everyone is looking for a positive term in everything. But I say we also need to be a bit realistic, because loneliness is there. We need to talk about this. We need to remove the stigma about everything around it. And that means to talking about it. There's one thing being lonely, and that can be a healthy thing, to feel lonely and missing people. But when you feel the loneliness I'm talking about in my book is when you lose the connection with yourself, and you can be in a room with your family, with
yeah.
friends and colleagues, and still feel lonely.
First off, thanks for coming on to the Conversations with the Loneliness Coach. And Nick, one of the things that I think about in this work is what I kind of call, for me, it was my couch story, where I spent almost 2 years basically on my couch. I had just graduated from college and I was going to all these interviews. I was getting denied from all the interviews, and I was just going back to my couch. And I really started to feel invisible. And so it's like what you talk about in your book. I probably felt all these things. I felt isolated. I felt anxiety, stress, and I felt lonely. So I'm curious, what's kind of your couch story and what got you into the work of loneliness?
Well, first, Nathan, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's inspiring to be speaking with a loneliness coach. Obviously, a topic close to my heart as well. So, Nathan, what was it that brought me, and what was my couch? Well, I can be pretty frank and tell you that it was one major issue in my life that brought me to my couch or bed or wherever it was that I was stuck. And that was actually addiction, and it was alcohol addiction in my case, and that was running and taking over my life a few years ago.
And so, with it being alcohol and addiction, what has kind of got you to the spot that you are right now, where you're kind of leading executives out of whatever their couch or their addiction story is into what I imagine is a more meaningful and fulfilling life?
Well, I dedicated my book to an executive that sadly died of suicide in Singapore in 2019. And we all have our own stories and our own issues that is happening. In his case, it was also similar to me. He didn't speak to anyone about what was going on in my life. And it doesn't matter how we hide, if it's through an addiction or isolating ourselves at home, watching Netflix 24/7. It's all an escape from facing reality and from connecting with other people and so on. So that is why I wanted to really spread this word, Nathan, and because I want others to be aware and watch out for what can happen, because it shouldn't go as far as it did with my friend. And in my case, I had to crash, and my health was giving up, and also a bit like you, I couldn't leave the sofa or the bed for some time. I was so sick that I started to write my will, my testament. I wasn't really suicidal, but I just realized that life was over. I had nothing to live for. So I wanted to clean up everything, because I didn't want to leave a mess for my relatives and especially my son. So that was what brought me then to my knees. And coming out of that, I feel that I need to give back for the rest of my life this gift of recovery that I got.
Mm, I love that. And I also love that you work all over the world. And so you're interacting with people who are coming from different cultures and living very different life experiences. So, what do you think is one universal truth that you've learned through working with all these different cultures around human connection?
Well, I think one thing that I see in common is that everyone is facing anxiety. It's just the way we are as human beings, and everyone have problems, and it's just the way how we deal with it. And if I just say something I see in here in conclusion, I think that is that the people who speak about their feelings and the problems, who have perhaps been taught as a child to talk about the feelings and the emotions and to speak up and without getting punished for it, they tend to also bring that good habit with them in adult life and share openly. For myself, Nathan, I'm born in Sweden. We are pretty distant society. We didn't need any social distancing around COVID to keep apart, right? So, so in that sense, we don't really talk about feelings. We don't really speak to anyone. And I brought this with me up in then adulthood, and that is what I see. The people who do that, who, especially when you then work and you start to become an executive or even a senior executive, if you're leading an organization, you're going to face so much challenges, so much pressure. And if you're keeping that inside you and you don't share how you feel or even talk to someone about it, that's when you start a downward spiral. That is one thing that I see is universal all over the world.
Hey, I relate so much. I'm from the US, but my family came from Norway. So I feel you on the feelings thing.
Okay.
And so what kind of, as you said, you brought that into your adulthood, who's somebody or a situation that kind of made you rethink talking about your feelings? Like, I imagine it was probably a person who made you feel safe enough to share what was going on.
Well, it had to go as far as that I was really sick, and I mean, my body was breaking down, and alcohol and the addiction was more or less ruining my life at that time. And I went through divorce. I resigned from my job. I didn't know what country I lived in. I moved from one country to another, trying a new job, and I was basically lost. I lost the confidence in myself and in life in general at that time. And so when I was basically at my really worst, I luckily got remarried, and I decided to tell her how I felt. And she was completely shocked. She thought I had it all together. She saw this successful guy. She didn't see any of the downsides that the stories I was playing for myself internally. But because I told her, naturally, she wanted to help me. And she took me to a doctor. And then after that, also an anonymous support group, mental health, addiction related. And that's where I just started to share my story and speaking up honestly for the first time perhaps in my life. I felt safe in this confidential environment, and I kept coming back every day. And after about 3 months talking to people every day in this room, I started to also get the confidence to tell some close family members, some close friends, and they were all surprised and shocked to hear how I felt internally. But as I started to share my story, the loneliness disappeared from me, and I started to feel connected. I started to feel better because everyone showed sympathy and understanding. They didn't judge me. So that was the transformation that I went through, and it was a wonderful journey. Those 3 months from coming of almost not being able to move to suddenly, be full of life again.
Yeah, 100%. I bet. It felt like, I'm sure at first it was like a shock, kind of like, oh, I can feel a different way. Um, you
Yes.
know, one of the things I wonder is what, in all the peer networking that you do, what's one of the biggest myths, or what do you think that people should be talking about when it comes to loneliness and connection that they aren't, or you're not seeing it right now?
Well, I think loneliness overall is a topic that people are uncomfortable speaking about. And I mean, the topic of my book is called executive loneliness. And in people's mind, that is a negative term, and people perhaps try to avoid it when you invite people for a talk and so on. People are quite skeptical. That just means that they're uncomfortable hitting it heads on, and everyone is looking for a positive term in everything. But I say we also need to be a bit realistic, because loneliness is there. We need to talk about this. We need to remove the stigma about everything around it. And that means to talking about it. There's one thing being lonely, and that can be a healthy thing to feel lonely and missing people. But when you feel the loneliness I'm talking about in my book is when you lose the connection with yourself, and you can be in a room with your family, with
Yeah.
friends and colleagues, and still feel lonely, and that is not a good feeling, right? And you know all about that, Nathan, too.
Yeah. The idea that you're with someone, with a group, and yet you feel like, does anybody does anybody see me? Do I matter? Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Um, so I'm curious, you have 5 pathways that you talk about in overcoming loneliness. And so the 5 pathways are taking stock, asking for help, um, getting healthy, and nurturing relationships, and finding your purpose. And so I actually had some thoughts. Like, what stood out to me was you talked about this story about a can of soda, right?
Hmm.
And making amends. So I want to hear about this can of soda and how it kind of led to this idea of making amends when it comes to your relationships with other people.
Well, basically, Nathan, I believe that we have a lot of baggage we're walking around with every day, and that is stories we are playing for ourselves in our mind. And through the recovery journey, one of the steps there indeed was to repair the relationships. And what that meant was that you have to basically make a list of all the people that you can, when you're thinking about them, you have some negative feelings there. Maybe you have some resentments, you feel upset, sad, you were hurt, and then you need to fix all of those so you don't walk around with that. So that's what I did. I had to go back to, childhood friends, things, incidents 20, 30 years ago, and make amends and say, I'm sorry for that, I didn't really mean that. And one amend I made was to my sister for something that happened many years ago, when we had a family lunch, and it was normal for her to give a soda to her children, but my son was only 3 years old, and I didn't think he should have so much sugar, a sugar drink. He never had it before. And without asking me, she invited him for a soda, and I didn't really see it. So there he was enjoying himself, drinking his first soda. And I felt a bit offended. And I basically pulled my son from the table and stormed off the table. And I was very angry. Then I avoided my sister for some time after that, and she couldn't really understand why I didn't talk about that incident. But I just basically, I was quiet, and our relationship went very, very silent. Then when I made these amends and I told her about this, she couldn't even remember this incident. And as soon as I was thinking about my sister, that incident played on my mind, and it really caused me a lot of pain. So there I was, walking around with this for many years, and it was so nice just to clear it. And I did it in person over lunch with her, and that's what I did with all my relationships, Nathan. So now I don't have any broken relationships that I can think about.
So when thinking about that, because I think that's going to help so many people, are there ones where you made amends with someone, and maybe you had to, when you were thinking about it, maybe they aren't around anymore and you're not able to do it in person? Are there any relationships where maybe you just didn't have to do it, or you didn't do it in person, or weren't able to?
Yes, there are those instances, and you can. I mean, if you cannot reach the person, you can send perhaps an SMS, WhatsApp message, an email to the person, if possible, or pass on a message in any way you can. If the person is still not around, you cannot catch them. At least you can write a letter to the person, and then even just put it in a drawer, or you can do a prayer about it and pray for the person. At least you have done your share. You clean your side of the street, and you have no baggage. You've done everything you can, and you can move forward.
Yeah. Oh man, that's beautiful when you're able to come to the point of realizing what's your responsibility and what you can take ownership for. I think oftentimes we take ownership for stuff that's not ours, and we're like, why isn't this working? Because it's not yours to be working on.
Absolutely, that's right. And that once we start to learn that and make a habit of this, Nathan, we can make this a daily affair. I try now before I go to bed every night. I think back of the day. Did I send an email to someone I didn't mean? Did I send a message, or did I say something that wasn't quite right? I would then make that amend before I go to bed and sleep. I will send them a message saying, sorry, that didn't came out right. I'll see you tomorrow for a coffee, or I give you a call tomorrow. And then you can have a good night's sleep, and you will not wake up feeling anxious or worried about any relationship that's gone wrong.
Yeah, 100%. I like that. And that kind of leads me to another note that I made when looking at your part of the book where you're talking about finding your purpose, and you talk about gratitude, right? And so my question to you is there anybody that's out there right now that may not know how much they mean to you, that you would like to express gratitude for? And then maybe you can talk about why that's so important to you.
Well, I think that's a head-on question, Nathan, and it's so important to be grateful for what we have, and the people around us and so on. And there was Mother's Day in Sweden actually on Sunday this week. It's every country have their own days, and I reminded myself that my mom really supported me through university and so on. And I wasn't grateful at the time; I couldn't show it, but I remember even this Sunday that I really made a social media post about my mom, showing my gratitude. And for me being from Sweden, and also again not used to talk to emotions and so on with my parents, it's still difficult to do that. I have no problem to say how thankful I am and gratitude to my son, but somehow with the relationships of the parents, it's different. So I still can do better there, and I can still show more appreciation for all the support she did, but I'm still struggling to express it to her.
So if there's somebody out there that just heard that and they're like, "Oh man, I relate to that so much," what kind of advice, and maybe you have like your process that you actually walk through where you're like, "I'm a little resistant, but I know I'm going to do it anyway." What's that process look like for you?
Yeah, well, in my recovery program, Nathan, I was given a sponsor. So in many of these programs, you were given a sponsor, someone who's done it before, who take you through it, and that helps because you have someone who is accountable. You will tell them, I will make amends, so I will go and talk to these people, and then you do it, and then they help you and guide you through it. If you don't have that, there's a lot of coaches and people who can help you to take through it, or a friend or a mentor or someone who can hold your hand. Because what I learned here, Nathan, we are as human beings sometimes trying to take the easy way out. And it's easy if you have a list of 10 people and 7, 8 are the easy ones, you do them. And then it's your ex-boss who fired you, that you're naturally not going to, you're going to put it off. And that's the one you need to do. So the tip is here. Yeah. I mean, as they say, eat that frog. You got to do it. You got to get up there and do the hard ones first, because then things will go easy. And those are the ones that give you the biggest relief as well.
So I like to talk about like what you just said made me think of like one of the hardest things I think people have is what I call make that call, right? We have the people, they're on our mind all the time. And yet we're like, oh, Nathan's too busy. He can't take my call. Or, I'll call him tomorrow, right? We don't know if tomorrow is coming. And so we've got to, as you said, eat the frog, make the call. And it's really about having the courage to do the thing that that you need to do. And it's going to make you feel more connected. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit when it comes to like being aware of what's going on for us.
Yes, that's so true, Nathan, and indeed, and it is the big rewards that's coming from that, and you get so much confidence once you've gone over that hurdle and you made that amend, or you shown that gratitude. And what we also learned in the program of recovery was that actually write a gratitude list. You could start every morning writing a gratitude list, and sometimes you can team up with a few friends that maybe you create a small group. Where 5, 6 people, and everyone first thing in the morning they post 3 or 5 or 10 things they are grateful for. It just programs the mind in a day for appreciation. And I even did it this morning. Actually, I went up, and it's 8:30 here in the morning now. I was up before sunrise. I went for a small little bike ride, and it was so beautiful. I climbed up a small mountain here in Singapore, and I took a snapshot of the sunrise, and I just reminded myself, and I shared it with my friend. I'm so grateful, for my health and exercise, and for this beautiful morning. And actually, my whole mood brightened up just after that little episode.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So one thing I'm taking away thus far is like the power in the small things.
Yes.
And so you just mentioned the bike ride. I was looking at your Instagram, and the first thing on there is Iron Man. So what has being an Iron Man taught you about loneliness and dealing with that?
Well, we all need sort of our clan or our group, and sometimes it can be music related, or whatever we like, or you belong to a church or something. We need some kind of club or association where we feel connected. And for me, it has been around triathlon. I really like everything around it. We're talking about food, nutrition, sleep, recovery, in regards to sport and the exercise and the discipline. And I think having been there in a deep depression, having been sick from it, going through a marathon or an Ironman event, for me, the pain you feel then is nothing compared to lying there on the sofa and having lost the hope and so on. So I also like the challenge of getting out there and competing in an Ironman event, and conquering the pain, and the planning around it, the strategy, and passing that finishing line is just an amazing feeling. And since I these days also I stopped consuming alcohol for over 4 years. After my trouble, I realized there was some things that had to go in my life. So this is still my addictive personality, also talking a little bit. And sport is now my addiction, but probably it's a better one than drugs or alcohol or something like that.
Isn't that the funny thing about having that type of personality? It just moves from one area to another, and hopefully it's in the positive direction for sure. Man, so if somebody's sitting here, they're listening to us, or they're watching us in this conversation, and they're that person on the couch right now, what's your message to that person?
That definitely, if they can talk to someone about how they feel, is it someone who they haven't spoken with, who they can share what they're feeling. And if they also have the energy to write down what would be that little inventory, what are the 5, 10 things in their life that is not going well, and be brutally honest. In my case, it was that I had gained a lot of weight. I had stopped exercise. I was consuming too much alcohol. I had all these broken relationships, and I just wrote those down in that, and then deal with them one by one and talk to people. If you're looking at one by one, I have an alcohol addiction. Well, there's a support group for that. I'm overweight. There's support for help, and then for that as well. And as we said before, Nathan, we shouldn't be so scared to ask for help.
Yeah, that's one of those ones that's much easier said than done, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but having somebody that you can turn to and you feel safe with to talk to, and like you said, that non-judgment is so important. Is there anything that you wish people would ask you about that they never do?
And that's a great question, Nathan. What would that be? Yeah, and actually, I wish more people have even asked me, even though I've written the book and so on. Still, people are still scared to ask me for help. I'm also a volunteer for Samaritans, a suicide prevention agency here, and I'm also a volunteer for a hotline for alcohol addiction. And you'd be amazed that there's so few calls coming in. It's so few. It's only when it's really bad. Why things have to go so bad before people are actually speaking up and asking for help. So I wish more people who feel that they're on the wrong path, is addressing it before it go too far.
And so as you think about that and the asking for help, what, maybe it's a way that you've done it. What does that look like in a way that I can take action? So I know I need help. I know that I'm looking for connection, but I don't know how to reach out to you. Nick, what do I do?
Mm. Well, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find me on LinkedIn. You search for NickJonsson. So that's Nick Jonsson. Or if someone want to look me up also for my book, it's on Amazon. It's called Executive Loneliness. And it was actually topping men's health and mental health in US, if only for a day. So you should be able to find it there. And my contact details are in the book as well.
Awesome. I have one kind of final question here. And what I really want to know, we've talked about all these different things that are impacting loneliness and connection. And so when I think of connection, I think of meaningful relationships. So, what does a meaningful relationship look like for you?
A meaning relationship is where we give and we look at how we can be of service to the other person rather than looking from our own side and thinking what's in it for me.
Straight to the point. Give rather than thinking what's in it for me, and give without, I would say, expectation.
Absolutely, you got it.
Yeah. So I've enjoyed this time we've been able to spend together, and make sure that if you enjoyed the conversation, if Nick said something that really resonated with you, clip it, tag us in social media so that we know the impact that it made.
Thank you, Nathan. Looking forward to this.